Hello, welcome to Dive into World Building. First, an announcement. We have a guest author coming next week. Nisi Shaw will be here. It's going to be awesome. We're going to talk about Everfair, so please come. And that will be amazing. But that said, today we're going to talk about charity and justice and, well, let's see. Both of them are sort of ideas, concepts, abstract concepts, but they get played out in action. And so, what I'm going to do is talk about how we conceptualize these things and then how they're related, if that makes sense. Oh, and here's Brian. Hey, Brian.
Hello.
Thanks for making it. We're just getting started. We're running a little late. That's okay. So first, let's talk about charity. Charity is one of those classic virtues, and it's certainly listed as a virtue in a lot of religions. And I guess it has to do with personal kindness and helping people out who are less fortunate, right? Thoughts on how you would define charity? Anyone?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is donations of money, and then goods, and then time, though that is not necessarily recognized as valuable when you're talking about people who have the time to give, who aren't using
right. That's usually referred to as volunteering, but I agree. It's a form of charity. And Brian is saying kindness without the expectation of reward. But a spiritual reward for religious people. Sure.
Well, yes. In some places, though, you do have the potential for basically a tangible reward in tax deductions.
Well, that's true.
The donation that you make is probably going to make a bigger difference to the recipient than to you and whatever you get.
Right. But that's a good point.
It is sort of a little pat on the back.
Yeah, exactly. And so, yeah, there are charity organizations, right? But I often think of charity as something that individuals are supposed to do out of their heart. And a charity organization is just a bunch of individuals who have banded together to take their individual heart donation and sort of maximize its reach, I guess. There's also there are also things like donating what is the name of that service where they give people cows or goats or chickens? You know what I'm saying?
Heifer International?
Heifer International.
Yeah, Heifer International. I'm just thinking of some of the different things that are done by charities. Some charities clean and recycle clothes, I guess, and then or objects that people no longer want.
Yeah.
They're all, but there's also the Heifer International approach, which is animals. And then there's also, you remember that thing where there are some organizations where you or your family can personally sponsor an individual in another country?
Oh yeah, those commercials, yeah.
Yeah.
I've always felt uncomfortable with those because it's like, who decides who gets picked? What, you know, you're helping one child and then all the others are left behind. It's like, it's a very kind of colonialist, imperialist form of charity. I have felt bad about that kind of thing.
Yeah, and in fact, I personally don't even know how one gets connected up with that. But for example, I know that one of these organizations had an event at a local church, and they literally laid portfolios out on tables and let people pick. Like, so that it's not even their deal how the people get picked. Right? That you let the individuals pick. Which I'm very uncomfortable with as well, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's like, how do you choose? And I think in a way, Che has a point, calling charity colonialism. Yeah, like, I don't know. There's something about it that's very odd. Like, you know, this external force that has approved of you on some utterly personal, quixotic level, right? And is saying you are not like the others, and you know, yeah. I mean, it's weird, right? And there's always the question of, well, you know, there are so many different charitable causes that are deserving. How do you pick which ones you interact with? Do you, you know, the question of how do you choose is actually really fundamental to the whole question that I wanted to talk about today, right? Because are you walking down the street and feeling like you ought to give change to people who are needy or asking you for money on the street, right? Or are you saying, well, I can't choose those people, I have to go through existing charitable organizations, right? And there's also a level of controllingness, I think, on some of these things, because a lot of it is, well, is this person worthy of my sponsorship? That's a sort of a weird question. It's again this how do you choose question that Brian brought up, right?
But there are a number of different.
What were you saying, Morgan?
Sorry, there are a number of different ways, and maybe you're about to get into that, and some of them are personal connection. To things like some people will support animal shelters,
right?
Support our local shelter, and that is something that a lot of people think isn't important, and that's fine. They can go do something else that they think is important, that I may or may not agree is, you know, as important. But there's also the, you know, so is there a personal connection? Are you supporting a cancer charity because there's someone in your family or a friend
right.
of you? There are religious connections. Does your temple or your church group support this, or do they have charitable group?
Right.
Meals on Wheels, for example, if that's something that your church group or your synagogue participates in, that might be something that you would choose over giving money to something else in another place. And then presentation, advertising, what, you know, which groups spend what kind of money on making sure that you know that they exist and what they are doing and how to give them money. So those are things that'll put charities where you can have to make a choice.
Yeah. It's an interesting question. It's a very interesting question, and I think yeah. So I'm looking at Che's remark on refusing to take charity. There is a let's talk about that for a minute. Charity is a thing that often people repudiate, I guess. You know, there's a huge value, at least in our culture, placed on being able to take care of yourself and not be a burden on others. And that gets spun in a lot of different ways. So, you know, it depends on how, yeah, it depends on how you perceive this, your own need for help, you know.
I think that's,
and whether you've had shame associated with it in your life, that kind of thing. It also depends on how you perceive your own opportunities. And whether you see the world as somehow just. Because if you see the world as fundamentally just, then you'll tend to think that whatever you have is what you deserve. Right?
Or that what other people have is what they deserve.
Right.
Which goes along with that.
What people have is what they deserve. And it's a strong concept in our culture, I think. Yeah. Brian, would you like to talk about that?
No, sorry, that's a side point.
No.
That's my point. That's right in the chat box, not the main thing.
No,
Carry on.
that's a
Okay.
different topic.
But I think okay, so Brian's talking about US foreign aid. And I don't want to go deep into that, but I do notice that what you're saying about how
there are forms
US
of
foreign
charity
aid is provided with strings that require it to be spent in specific ways, often employing American companies.
that does not surprise me in the least.
It's charity with strings. It's like, look, we're giving you this fantastic stuff, but in fact, what you have to do is this, which is not real charity at all. That's only one example of it. This happens a lot. It's like, you know, we will provide you with funding, or we will provide you with this, but only if you behave in a way that we approve of. So
Yeah,
it's not charity, it's a form of control.
I've never thought of foreign aid as charity.
Yeah.
A lot of people do think of it as
well,
that, both the recipients and those who disagree with it being spent.
Yeah,
They're
a lot of
mistaken.
people like, why are we helping this foreign country when we have so many needy people here at home?
But you know
That's
what's
a lot of
interesting is
argument.
I think the U.S. places a lot of value on charity, right? Because being charitable is something that the U.S. Values in a lot of ways, right? But that charity very often comes with, well, it comes with strings attached. It comes with requirements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in order for us to be nice to you and help you, you have to do the following things. You have to be a certain way.
And that's colonial.
It's
so many ways.
colonial, but
Applied broadly.
But it's not. It is, but it's not just applied along race or international.
No,
Yeah, I mean,
it's
it's
cultural colonialism rather than specifically geopolitical.
I mean, you can call it colonialism because it's one of the aspects of colonialism, but I think it exists even when we're not talking about, it's what they talk about when they talk about like internalized colonialism, right? Or when you hear the phrase decolonized perspective, right? It's talking about a sort of a cultural hegemony, and a certain kind of acceptance of value requirements, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to put this into words. Basically, in order to receive our charity, you have to be good.
And that can be also a social enforcement of your own culture's rules within that culture.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
It doesn't have to be on people who are considered outside. It can be like, if you don't fit our definition of our culture, as I think Morgan was mentioning in chat.
Right.
Real quick, because I just got here, have we talked about Tzedakah yet? Because, given the name of the chat.
And I've somehow forgot to mention that when we were talking about Heifer International. That is a thing. No, we haven't. Sorry, we haven't.
So let's
Okay.
Tzedakah is
Can somebody write it in the chat, please, so that I can know how to spell it?
First, I have to learn how to spell it. Just a sec. I'm a bad Jew.
well, hey,
Morgan.
it's transliteration. That's as close as Sarah's going to get without
Great.
without
Awesome.
changing language.
So tell me what it is.
Well, the literal translation that I've heard, though, of course, translation's never completely literal, but what we were taught in Hebrew school, it means justice. And what it comes from in the Torah is that you're supposed to give a certain percentage of your crops to the less fortunate.
Mm-hmm.
So, today it'll mean a certain percentage of your income, or it'll mean the dollar you collect from everyone in Hebrew school, and then every day, and you vote at the end which charity it goes to. But I thought it was very interesting that the link between the words and how they were perceived differently. Like, we would call this charity, but apparently in Hebrew it's translated as justice.
Well, so yes. And the reason why I want to have both of the concepts in the same discussion is because they overlap, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting linguistic example of that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you bringing it up, because it's definitely worth doing. So I think inherent in something like tzedakah is the idea of the cohesiveness of a community.
Makes sense.
Right.
And with the less fortunate must be worth sharing with.
Well, yes. So one of the things that we've been discussing for a while here is this question of whether somebody is worthy of charity, right? And I think, in a way, the idea of community and community support basically takes as one of its underpinnings the idea that everyone is interconnected, and that people who are part of our community are inherently worthy of support. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of how you define people in a way.
Yep.
All those degrees of who's a person. Because, the Torah also doesn't say, hey, go over to, I don't know my history from this period, but go over to the next kingdom over and help their less fortunate. It says help the less fortunate, and assumes you mean those in your community.
Right. So there is an assumption of insideriness, right?
Yeah.
Well, there's also the fact that that at most points, what you're looking at in community is, in fact, who's right near you, because we didn't have the ability to know that on the other side of the world there are people who have a lot in common with us, but don't, are part of a community that we share, but could make good use of our charity,
Right.
what we would give to members of the community. But we didn't you didn't know. There's, without the internet, without airmail,
So-
without.
So you're talking
communication.
about when people's suffering is invisible, Morgan?
Yeah, whether because of distance or, well, because of distance in that particular case.
I mean, there are many reasons why somebody's suffering could be invisible to us, right?
And that,
Distance is one, but it doesn't even need to be distance. It just needs to be, privilege or just not being in the same situations that those people are in all day, right?
Yeah.
Not sharing experience, not
Also-
moving through the same circles, and so, yeah.
There's probably no way to be perfectly aware of all the suffering in the world, and I don't think anyone would want to be.
Yeah, you would not be mentally
Yeah,
well.
I
right.
think you sort of have to pick and choose. But that's why there's almost inevitably an organization for everything, so that
Yeah.
you can.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that I mean, the world is complex, right? And if we talk about people who are part of our community who need support, that
Will be
that
more
includes all kinds of people. It includes people who are elderly, who can't work anymore or don't want to work anymore because it's too hard on them, right? There are also disabled people.
Yeah. It's interesting though when you think about it. The closer you are to the community, the finer resolution you're going to have on the type of help people need. Like we'll send help to Haiti for a storm, but we won't send help to elderly people in Haiti who need assistance with this medical supply.
Right. Well, I mean, so, and let me just add, since I didn't finish my thought on disabled people, what I mean is that disability is a huge range of things, and certain people will need certain kinds of support, and some will be able to be active members of the community, work, etc., and others will not. And so, in fact, I'm reminded of that little cartoon that shows the three people of different heights watching the baseball game over the fence.
Yeah, I know that one.
And so what that's talking about is equality of opportunity, right?
Right.
Because the shortest person is going to need more boxes to see over the fence.
I've never liked that little cartoon because they're all stealing the baseball game that loads of other people have paid to get into. I think there's a question to be asked about this.
That's true. That's true.
That's fantastic.
But
I never
guess
thought of
what?
that.
If they didn't want people watching their baseball game, they should have
They
finished
should
that
build a
stadium,
higher
right?
fence.
They shouldn't just left
Yeah.
a fence there.
they're also assuming that the baseball game is something that everybody wants to see, and that is a thing. Yeah, I know it's standing in for things like education, which and it's assumed that will help everybody, but it could be standing in for things that are not actually relevant to everybody. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but when
Well,
you've got
so it's
something like a
interesting,
baseball
but
game,
You're right. Not everything is relevant. I don't want to see the baseball game. I'll tell you that right now.
I've seen a baseball game. It was boring.
but we have the option. We have the choice
Exactly.
of whether or not to go and see that baseball game. If we don't want it, we don't need it. But
Right.
we have the option. We could. And that's probably more of the point than
Right. And I think that where we start getting into justice is in this question of equality of opportunity. How do we define the base of equality of opportunity? How do we define what people should be able to have access to as support, right? Things like roads and schools,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Those were not always,
those were not always
anything.
available to people.
No, heavens no. And most people wouldn't have time for it anyway because you got to work in the field all day.
Or, or like electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird because, like, you think
Or
things like-
guys, water.
Water is a huge one.
Oh yeah.
That's
water.
become a huge issue now.
Yeah, that's actually more, I would say, universal and necessary than electricity.
Well,
Because now
exactly.
without
And yet it
electricity-
becomes an issue because you have places like Flint where the water is, there are
Poisonous.
not just Flint, but the water is poisonous. And now people are saying, well, maybe these people don't really deserve to have their water pipes fixed or something. Like what? Right? So
That's a basic requirement to participate in our society. You have to not have lead poisoning.
yeah,
not gonna work
it
well
should be
otherwise.
pretty obvious, right? I mean, so this is where you start seeing things like environmental racism stuff. So it's very easy for us to ignore those things that we have that we feel like are just the basis of a normal life, right? But which not everyone has, and not everyone can count on. And if you've ever been without plumbing or water for any period of time, you know that it's not. I mean, it heavily interferes with your ability to carry out your day.
Yeah.
That's another thing. The number of things you require, the types of things you require that are basic to entering and participating in society are going to change depending on, I guess, how complex your civilization is. I don't want to say advanced because I know that's kind of
Yes.
ethnocentric, but
Uh-huh.
complex seems like a good way to put it.
Yep.
There's also another concept from Judaism I wanted to bring up, if no one minds. It's called there was this scholar, very well known, very important Jewish scholar, at least as far as I remember, Moses Maimonides, and he came up with this whole ladder of the best way to help people out, the most morally praiseworthy way, and the top of it was help someone help themselves without them knowing. I think without them knowing who you are, because anonymous giving he valued more. And I think that that's a good point for world building. What kind of charity is seen as most righteous? What kind of giving has which connotations?
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think it was Morgan who said something about, do we know that the money will be used well or give money to
Well,
people?
so we haven't talked about abuse of charitable and other systems yet.
Before we get to that, though, that's very culturally defined. What, do we think that it's great?
Absolutely.
Do we think that it's a great use to build the human sacrifice god? Probably not, but someone might. Some theoretical culture.
Well, I mean, community projects like building the great cathedrals, those were huge, enormous projects, and so yeah, I mean, I think these are all things that you can think through in a secondary world, because I mean, I agree. What kind of charity is seen as most righteous is a good question. What is the basis for normal life is another really valuable question. Like, what is the basic minimum that everyone needs in order to participate in society? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Without which their situation would be considered appallingly unfair and must be fixed. I am.
Yeah. I think the better word is we are less than 100% familiar with our backgrounds, with our heritages.
Yeah, I just think it's funny to say I'm a bad Jew. There's no such thing as a bad Jew in my denomination unless you're being really unethical.
Yeah, in which
Yeah.
case you're just plain a bad
In which
bad
case
being
you're
a
just
person. But Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the other day, I'm not less Jewish than my Rebbetzin because I don't cover my head.
Great.
Right.
know,
So, but okay. So let's talk about bad for a second.
Good idea.
So
Okay.
if you're bad, how do you define bad? Right. Okay. So like committing crimes and stuff. Right. Um, we have uh, disenfranchised felons. Right. So people who have done bad things, I guess, do not have the ability to decide the future fate of the nation. And you can see where that argument comes from, but it's not necessarily a good idea.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
Yeah, well, it's like
a very
that sort
broad
of
thing.
justice is like how punitive do you want to be? How many rights do you strip from those who have done badly, and is it just to do that?
The tying of voting rights to convictions is not ideal because
Yeah.
of the people who are convicted are not necessarily people who've done bad things, and certainly not everybody who's done bad things, however you define bad things, have been, charged, tried, convicted
Right.
at all.
Right. So and in fact,
and-
whatever these people may have done, even if they've done something, it may have no relation to the kind of judgment that a person would need in order to vote on a representative, for example.
But it's
So-
just it's like the continued punishment. But that's interesting, like for world building, like if you have a character who has been in jail, is there a continuing punishment that they still undergo?
Mhm.
I wanted to bring up that felony is a very raw definition. For example, I just looked it up. You download a movie, I'm pretty sure that there are places where you convicted a felony. It was just a
Oh
Google
yeah,
search.
no. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that every different place is going to have a different definition of the things that are bad enough that you get in trouble for them. And so there are, of course, people who haven't done those things and get convicted
Yeah.
anyway.
But even then, I wonder why felony was chosen, because it's a very broad, broad brush. Because I mean, do I want a rapist voting for, someone who's going to impact women's rights? No. Do I
Except
really
that there are
care?
a lot of people who have never actually been caught.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they are
but-
voting all the time.
True, but my what I mean to do here is contrast the types of the felony when it was chosen must have been a very broad category, I think,
Yeah.
because there's a difference between that and some idiot teenager who downloads the new superhero movie.
Right. No, I hear you, and it's an interesting question, right? So, yeah. So this is I mean, hello, my cat has arrived. Oh,
Hello, cat.
he has
Cutie.
decided this is the moment. Mom, you will snuggle me now. My note taking abilities may go down.
The fact that you can't actually take notes while that's happening is that's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah, you know what? If I were able to take notes, this would not be a proper cuddle. That's all I'm saying. But anyway, so yeah. I think this whole question of the criminal justice system is an extension of this question of what makes a worthy member of the community. And that's a question that is really interesting to try to answer in a secondary world, right? Because it's not always going to be answered the same way.
Mhm.
And yeah. So, I mean, Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And also you have other things. Okay, so if we think of, for example, if we think of health care,
Mhm.
Is that something that should be assumed to be a basic part of what people deserve in order to be members of society?
And that's a big
Right.
question for a lot of people.
It's a
Well, I
big
think-
question for a lot of
That's
people.
a new question too. I you know, I think for the most part it was either, you know, you go to your local guy, healer, whatever, but I mean, you know, you have to pay something usually. The family or somebody usually has to pay something for getting these services.
Well, so the question is the burden on the individual for that, or is it on the community? Right?
And as is very evident, the whole culture is not going to agree on this kind of thing most of
Nope.
the time.
And I wonder if this is part of where religious prescription comes in. So if you've got a group of people who say, well, I don't think that should work that way, but you do, and we're going to disagree about it. If you can go to your religious text and say, but God says it works this way. And so it's not a discussion, it's written here. This is how it works. We have to do that. Then I'm wondering if that comes into it. And there are prescriptions for community. And if you're doing, if community rules are, you take care of your parents when they can't take care of themselves anymore. You take care of your children, when they cannot yet take care of themselves. That's not charity, it's family.
Yeah.
Now, if it gets, when you move outside your family and you say, okay, we're going to take care of the elderly in our community who cannot take care of themselves anymore. We're going to make sure that the children in our community are cared for because they cannot yet take care of themselves. Is that charity or is that community? How far out do you have to move before it becomes charity, something that is not something that you choose and not
something you're obligated,
something
something
that's
that's just
right. And in fact, I think you're onto something really important there. What is personal charity versus what is part of the sort of course, we're all going to contribute to our community as a whole, right? But one of the things I want to make sure that I bring up with regards to healthcare is, okay, say you broke your leg, right? That's kind of your problem, right? I mean, right? You're the one with the broken leg. But on the other hand, if you can't work because you have a broken leg, then it affects other people in your community, right? And then on the other hand, you've got things like measles. Now, I don't see any model under which that's not a community problem.
Epidemics generally are, yeah.
Yeah. So, so actually talking about healthcare as something that individuals should take care of, as though the community has no interest in making sure that each of its members has health care. It works fine if everybody's just breaking their legs, right? But whenever you get into infectious diseases, all of a sudden it's a really a community problem, right?
Yeah.
Of course,
And so,
if your
in fact,
answer
this is
to
why we're
that is to
seeing-
go sacrifice a cow, you're still going to have problems.
But you'll also have some sort of community solidarity. You'll have some sort of social effect. I don't know if it'd be a benefit or not.
It's still not going to save you from microbes.
It's not, but it's going to affect how the survivors interact. I don't know, just thinking there.
But anyway, so I think these are the kinds of questions that I find really fascinating. And I think that they can be answered differently, as they are answered differently in different cultures of the earth. I think that we can answer them differently for different fictional cultures.
Yes.
Hey,
And for
Julia,
example, yeah.
like, do you have examples? Like, what form does charity take in Japan? Maybe I don't really know
Yeah,
anything about.
I'm actually trying to think of that, but they do. For example, I mean, I know that they have healthcare for everyone who lives there, and that's considered to be a basic. Now, of course, there always a question of abuse, or whether people are discriminating against particular people and how they interact and whatever. But when I lived there, I could just walk to the nearest hospital and say, "Hey, I need some help," and they would help me. No payment, no questions asked.
That's interesting. I had an ear infection there, and I did have to pay. Is that because I wasn't a resident of any sort, do you think?
I don't actually know.
Anyway, they also have
that.
It's also worth mentioning that the Japanese will have, they have a day to celebrate in your life. You're becoming a citizen, your new responsibilities. They have a day with school kids where they're going to talk about how you need to pay your taxes.
Right. There's a strong sense of community responsibility there. And in fact, you might be interested in seeing, there's this article that I'm going to try to go find it, about why Japanese kids are so independent at such an early age. And in fact, they have, your first ever errand as a kid, and you can be like 2.
Wow.
Going with your 5-year-old brother to the store, or your mom, without your mom, right?
Are we talking like Tokyo, or are we talking villages, or are we talking both?
Both.
Wow.
Yeah. And, kids in first grade taking the train to their school.
Yep. That one I knew, but
so what you're dealing with on some level there is you're dealing with the assumption that people will look after the community's children, right?
Yeah.
And will, that every person along the street that the kid has to walk to do the errand, plus the person at the store, will be willing to say, "Oh, I know this kid. This kid is a member of my community. I'm going to make sure that they don't get lost. I'm going to make sure that they're safe. I'm going to make sure that their errand gets carried out." Right?
Their independence is dependent on community.
Yes.
And I think that's something that isn't always recognized here, is that the independence of a person
has to be supported.
Yeah, this whole bootstraps thing is the idea that if you break your leg, it's your problem.
If you're Mad Max, then maybe let's talk about utter independence, right?
If you're off the grid and
if you're off the grid and it's post-apocalyptic, who knows what, right? But people are still depending on each other, even in Mad Max.
Yeah, they may not have very healthy dependencies, even compared to our own society, any other society on Earth, but they have dependencies and they have interactions.
Yeah.
Well, everybody's got dependencies. You are dependent on what is around you and who is around you. If you are around people, you are dependent on them for one thing or another, because their behavior, their actions affect you.
And if you don't have anyone around, you will have serious psychological consequences.
Yeah, humans are community people. They're community creatures. We are community creatures,
right? And you have animals whose evolutionary success depends on their community, right? Like ants.
Not just mating, but the community.
Beehives. It's not just your personal characteristics that allow you to be evolutionarily successful. It's also the strength of your community and and whether your community survives has more to say about your evolutionary success as a species than your individual success.
I don't know. I mean, we're pretty horrible, and we still have succeeded.
Well, then again, we have to
Beyond
judge. Horrible, do we mean
expectation.
morally, or do we mean in terms of efficiency? Short term or long
I don't think
We're like
success.
really
you know, I don't-
crappy animals. We're like the shittiest animals on the
Okay,
planet.
that's true.
Che, I think you're going in a different direction here.
All right.
I mean, because look, honestly, whether we consider ourselves to be good or not is not exactly relevant to whether we are successful as a species or not.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
So those are a couple of different
things.
criteria. they have to be judged on different measures, you know. So but like, you know, ants, right? Or, you know, it's I think it's really interesting to take a look at species like ants, where you have a community, and the success of the species is all about the community, because lots of members of the community don't have the ability to reproduce, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so evolution is actually a very complex thing. People think it's a very simple thing a lot of times,
no.
but even if they accept it, they sometimes can think it's overly simple.
Genetics. I mean, there's so many traits involved and so many stressors in the environment. It's not like we're going to be able to predict anything.
Right. So, right.
So
we're
ants
running
don't-
out of time, but yeah. And then there's also, if you're actually working in a secondary world, one of the other things you're going to want to take a look at, and this would like be a whole other, we've talked about abusive systems before. Corruption was one of our topics, so you can go back and watch that video if you want to. But any kind of system that, whether it be a charity or whether it be an individual who's helping out another individual, or there's always the possibility for abuse, right? So you've got charities who don't give all their money to charity, right? I can think of a couple off the top of my head, but I'm not going to mention them because I don't want to go there.
I'm an angry autistic sometimes. That's all.
I had an unscrupulous host family who was using me for money at one point.
Oh,
That
wow.
So, you know, you can have individual abuses of charity, of any kind of, that was like a partly charity, but partly, that was a lack of charity in a business relationship, I guess. And you can have people who are gaming the system, right? But so it depends on it depends on what you see as the overall value, right? Perfection is not going to be something that comes with a large scale system. And so the question
Definitely.
is, how valuable is the health of the community? How valuable is the normal life? How valuable is the health of the community? How valuable is the idea that everybody in the community should have a certain basic level of life? And if we assume that there are always going to be people who abuse it, does that mean that we need to toss out the assumptions about what a basic normal life should consist of? My personal answer would be no, but there are obviously people who disagree. So, yeah, it's an interesting question.
It is.
And I know we have to wrap this up. I didn't even know what to say. Like, this is obviously a huge topic that we could go a lot further with. And we haven't even really talked much about legal systems or anything like that. But maybe we should put that on the list for something to talk about another time.
Yeah, has that been covered before?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I've done so many of these now.
I know, because legal systems would be really interesting because there's so many different kinds.
Yeah, and we could talk about Hammurabi because yay. I'll put that on the list of a topic to pick up.
Okay.
And yeah, and disability. I have talked about disability on the show before, but there's always more.
Oh yes, it's
there's
very
always
complicated.
more to be talked about. So anyway, thank you all for being here, and I hope that you'll be able to make it next week. I believe the time for our hangout with Nisi Shawl is next Wednesday. I guess that would be 12.
Just
Let me check. It could be the 12th or the 13th. So I'm gonna make sure that I confirm the date. I know you. I know Morgan. I know you want to be here on the 13th. So what I'll do is I will confirm the date of that via all the usual Facebook and Twitter and such. And I'll try to post it up on the Dive Into World Building blog as well. And thank you all for being here. And I'm going to stop the broadcast.